Hello and good afternoon. Welcome back to our talent podcasts. You're here with both myself and Amy, and today we are joined by our wonderful Chief Revenue Officer, Mark Ash. Today's session is going to be all about adaptability and resilience. Of course, that is one of our rethink mindset capabilities that we now cover as part of this podcast. Before we introduce Mark, I just wanted to say thanks for joining us again. Adaptability is absolutely one of my favourite capabilities that we've started talking about a lot more within the organisation. It is probably one of the top kind of human skills that I would say people can possess. I think historically we talk about this a lot, but there's been a lot of emphasis placed on kind of technical skills, but actually I think one of the key things that we need is adaptability. It gives us the ability to communicate, negotiate, interact with different people, think more creatively, and ultimately innovate as well, which is key for any business success and personal success as well. So before I babble on too long, Ames, do you want to say a quick hello and then we can introduce Mark?
Yes, hello. Also one of my favourite rethink mindset capabilities too. I think it's just one of the ones that's so important for us now, isn't it? I think, I'm always talking about the world in a constant change. And I think adaptability gives you that ability to be resilient and kind of ride those change waves a little bit. So yeah, thank you all for joining us again.
Perfect. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself? I mean, most people will know who you are, but it would be good just in case they don't.
Yeah, and firstly, thanks for the invite. Absolutely delighted to be here on your podcast with you. So, Mark Ash, I'm Chief Revenue Officer for Konica Minolta in the UK. Chief Revenue Officer is becoming a more commonly used term now, as many of the terms that migrate over from the States often do. In our language, Chief Revenue Officer really means that I head up the teams for marketing, sales and service. So everyone that's customer facing.
Fantastic. Actually, that's really good that you've pointed that out, actually, Mark, because that is definitely not a term that I've heard a lot before. So it's quite interesting to actually understand that it's come over from the States. I didn't actually realise that. Did you, Ames?
No, I had no idea. I thought it was a very fancy job title.
Yeah.
It's good to know of its origins.
It's definitely not unique. So I have the pleasure of attending a Chief Revenue Officer conference in a couple of weeks' time in the UK, and there's quite a large audience there of C-level execs throughout the UK. So it's definitely not particular to us.
That's really good to know, though, that there is a network out there for you as well, isn't there, of people kind of that are doing very similar things as well.
100%, and indeed, it's interesting. We're going to come on to adaptability and resilience, but one of the things we as human beings can do is we can absolutely learn from others, and there's a lot of other people that have been through the situations that you have, and therefore they can help you get an advantage or avoid some of the pitfalls.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I think that's key, isn't it, Mark? You already hit the nail on the head there, but yeah, embracing learning for me, I think that's one of the key parts of adaptability. Thinking about, actually, Mark, when you said before that Chief Revenue Officer, you do cover quite a large remit, don't you? Quite a broad remit. So I guess that kind of leads us on to our first question in terms of you. So you must have to be quite an adaptable person to be able to take on this type of role. So I guess we just wanted to know from you, what do you think actually makes a person adaptable? What kind of are the key traits that you would say you've seen in your career?
It's interesting because if I gave you my answer, you'd have my lens on the world. What my kids would do is my kids would ask Google. So if you ask Google, Google says it's two things really. It's the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions, and it's also to be the capacity to be modified for a new use or purpose. I'd like to take it back to pre-Google days, if you can think back that far. Indeed, you were alive that long ago.
Yeah, I don't think I was.
There's a very famous quote from Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin says, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. it's the one most adaptable to change.
Yes.
And that actually gives me goosebumps, because whilst Google is right, the reality is that is such a profound quote. And we talk a lot about change and how different people respond to me. And someone recently said to me, Mark, everybody likes change until it applies to them.
Yeah.
So for me, I think if you think about what makes a person adaptable, well, the key is to hold the mirror up and say, in any given constant, the only common thing is you. So actually, if it's to be, it's up to me. And if you think that way, then ultimately you can make the right decision. And if you are working with someone else and they don't understand the decision you've made, or they don't agree with it, then typically if you reflect inwardly and you hold that mirror up and think, well, actually, have I given them enough information to make the decision that you want? And if you're working with our CEO Rob's great at talking about taking a view from someone else's hilltop. And that's good as well, because sometimes we have a view and we think that view is reality. It's not, it's our view. And therefore, when you constantly enact your views, that becomes history. And if you think of the word history, that is actually his story. So it's not fact, it's not reality, it's a view of someone's. So if you can take the view from someone else's hilltop, or as we used to say, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, then you get a different perspective.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
It is. I'm just thinking about, it's all about kind of, I suppose, changing your own thought process, Mark. Have I understood that right? Kind of from what you've just been saying, is it about thinking about ways that you can turn things around, or?
Yeah, I think it's just really thinking that the road we take in life, it's not there's not one clearly predefined path. There's not one form of reality. Reality is a social construct, and it's built on the things that we see. So I remember, I think it was watching an Attenborough documentary. They were saying that what we see with our eyes is not reality. It's how our eyes are conditioned to see. So if you are a different animal, a different species, you will see a different light spectrum, and therefore you will have a different version of reality. So for me, if you're adaptable, it just means that you can change according to new conditions, and you don't have a closed mindset.
That makes a lot of sense. I was, when you were talking earlier, actually, I was thinking, it was just ringing in my head, fixed mindset, open mind, growth mindset. Just everything you were saying was say that it's all about improving, learning and growing, I suppose, isn't it? And as you say, seeing different perspectives. And I think that's a key thing as well, Mark, because it's and we talk about it a lot, the three of us actually, thinking about kind of being part of some of the employee resource groups. It's about, I suppose, encouraging others to be open-minded as well, isn't it? And embracing learning. So learning from different people, staying curious, I think obviously would be a key thing for adaptability, would it not?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess the broader, in terms of your mindset, then the more adaptable you're going to be, because you can think about the different scenarios, or you're more open to change then as well, aren't you?
Yeah, you absolutely are.
That's very insightful. I enjoyed that. Where do you think resilience plays a part in that adaptability, though?
Where do I think that resilience plays a part in adaptability? I think that if you look at resilience and you think about what resilience is not something that you are innately born with. You do not come out of the womb resilient. And it means different things to different people. And actually, my granddad gave me some great advice, and he said to me, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So if you think of resilience as a skill, it's a skill you have to work on, and you have to build it up. You don't have to have a near-death experience to build resilience, although trust me, they do help. So I think my resilience really comes initially from working from a company that had a philosophy of Kaizen, or continuous improvement. So it means that I am adaptable because it drives me every day to look for improvement in every area.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean that something's broken because you want to improve it.
Mm.
Just a different mindset. It's an adaptable mindset, and it's basically saying you've got a constant desire to achieve more, and it means you have to look at problems as opportunities in reverse. So every day I start the day with 3 things I'm grateful for, and every night before I go to sleep I do the same for that day. It's incredibly simple. However, really it's actually a life hack. And you can get this out of any podcast on leadership or any of the well-trodden and well-read leadership books. This is not something that I've had the fortitude to think of. But effectively, it's a simple trick, and it trains your brain to focus on the things to be grateful for, and not to focus on negatives. And if you do that, then when you have a situation that you could think of, well, I need to be resilient here, your brain doesn't even look at that situation in that way. It will just say, oh, that's a challenge. So ultimately, you just manage yourself, and you ensure that it doesn't affect your levels and your mindset.
So it's helping to shift that mindset, but also it's quite a good like grounding technique, isn't it, then, to sort of be in the present and then not to, I guess, to catastrophize or to kind of hypothesize around things. That I think that's the thing with change, isn't it? You can kind of make it bigger than it is sometimes if you kind of spiral. Whereas with that technique that you've just said, Mark, I think from a resilience perspective, it helps you to kind of gain actual perspective over what's happening and what you can control.
You've absolutely nailed it, Amy. It's critical, and I cannot overstate the importance of managing yourself. I used to get massively stressed, and I thought it was a job that was stressful. And I spoke to people around me, and they reinforced that notion. And I used to look at the UK managing director and the global CEOs, and I used to wonder, how did they ever sleep? How do they manage to deal with all the problems? Because quite often in senior roles, that's what you're paid to do.
Yeah.
But over time, I learned they're not problems, they're challenges. And if you can manage yourself, you move from distress, which is uncomfortable stress that we feel. In fact, we've shortened the word stress from distress to eustress. Now, eustress is actually positive stress. And there's a fantastic podcast on the High Performance Podcast, and it features Adam Peaty's coach. Adam Peaty is the Olympic multiple gold medalist in the swimming pool, for those that don't know. And his coach, Mel Marshall, is also a former Olympian. Mel talks about how the championships were won and lost when variables happened typically outside of the pool, and that affected the focus, the concentration levels of the team. So to prepare for this, she had a great philosophy. She took them to countries with poor facilities that had constant logistical challenges, e.g. you turn up to the pool in the morning and the outdoor pool's locked. And she said to the team, you find a solution. So the solution is quite simple. You climb over, and there's no nutrition. Okay, so the mindset is, well, I'm doing fasted training, and that helps to burn more fat. So whatever's thrown at you, you overcome it. And Adam Peaty actually referenced that when he had his own slot on the podcast, and he said, my kit was stolen. And I thought, it's no big deal. I've been through worse than this. I don't need it. I just need anything to cover myself when I jump in the pool, and I will win. And that we're starting to adopt in our UK business. We're calling it a warrior mindset, and it's really similar to the Marines' philosophy. If you're an elite athlete, you want everything to be optimized to enable you to be your best. What the Marines say is, we need you to be at your best when things are at your worst. Clearly on the battlefield, things are volatile, uncertain, they're complex, changeable, and ambiguous. You can't control that, so you have to deal the hand that you've been given. And that, for me, is incredibly relevant in the workplace that we operate in 2021, as we deal with COVID, as we deal with supply chain, as we deal with part shortages. And indeed, the last 24 hours, you can't buy a milkshake in McDonald's or chicken in Nando's.
What is happening in the world?
I know. But it's so true though, Mark. I think to link, Amy, when you were saying, where does resilience come into adaptability? For me, I was thinking before you kind of talked as well, Mark, I think the more adaptable you are, maybe, then the more resilient you come, if that makes sense. So it's, I don't know, it's all, to me, it's all about growth mindset and shifting that mindset as well. Kind of with the podcast that you were talking about, Mark, it was, I mean, Amy and I both listened to it, and it's mind blowing, isn't it? But I think it absolutely comes down to the ability to be able to shift the way you think about things, and it is really hard. Like, I find it really, really difficult, and Mark, you must yourself still find change quite frustrating. But I mean, I don't know, how do you ever find change frustrating? I mean, Amy, do you as well? I mean, I find it really difficult sometimes to shift my own mindset. But
Yeah, I find it frustrating. I've got this ever-going battle with change because I really like it. So everyone that knows me quite well will know that I regularly move house or do something quite dramatic, but I like it when it's within my control. And I'm starting to try and get more comfortable with some of the stuff that we've just spoke about. So the change that's outside of my control. And I think my question with resilience was a bit of a loaded question, because when I run any elements of training on resilience, I always talk about it as kind of it being a muscle. So you don't have to have this massive brick wall up in front of you all the time to be resilient, but it's that muscle that you keep working on all the time, so that you can pull on it when you need it. And I think for me, that's one of the best analogies, because it's so hard to see and witness sometimes with resilience, but you just keep working on it in the background when you're trying to overcome any challenges. So with change being frustrating, I'm trying to work on my resilience for the change that's outside of my control is probably the easiest way to explain it. What about you, Mark?
And that muscle you mentioned, it's a great analogy. If you look at the neuroscience behind it, effectively your brain, the synapses fire, and if you're trying to make a new connection, it's the equivalent to hacking through the jungle with a machete. You can't make much progress. It's very clunky, very hard, and that's why learning and change, if you're not used to it, is very, very different. However, when you have commonly used connections, so think about your relationship with your partner, your spouse, your husband, your wife. If you think about how quickly you can interpret the situation that's going on, you've built a motorway in your brain, and the equipment can get there almost at light speed. So to answer your question, as much as I love change, yes, I'm human after all. So at times I struggle with it, but the one thing that I often do is I eat my own dog food. So I think, okay, behind every action is usually a positive intention. What's the intention? And sometimes you don't know what it is. So if you're curious and you find out, you often find out that someone's got a positive intention you weren't aware of, and that's part, I think, being adaptable.
That is such a good point, and I think that really applies to our business as a whole, doesn't it, Mark? And I think we see this a lot with relationships, is that a brick wall comes up when anyone even mentions change. But I think a lot of the time it's because actually people don't understand the need or the positive impacts that these changes are going to have. It's automatically, I think, for some people seen as, oh, well, this is going to affect me in a negative way. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, agreed.
And just a quick one as well on that. If anyone hasn't listened to our first podcast, I spoke a little bit about the dreaded VUCA world that we always refer to, but just some of the positive elements that we can do to kind of combat some of the volatility and ambiguity that happens. So please do reach out if you kind of need any more advice around that. I wouldn't say I'm the expert, but I can definitely help to kind of coach and guide a little bit through that too.
Excellent stuff. I mean, yeah, VUCA, I mean, Mark's just mentioned it as well, hasn't he? It's kind of thinking about, it was originally set by the military, wasn't it? And that's kind of where it came from. So yeah, absolutely check that out. Mark, I've got quite a question for you, just because I find it quite interesting, and I'd really like to understand it a little bit more from a leadership point of view. So thinking about adaptability, and going back to the fact that, you know, you have quite a large remit, it means that you're currently, and I imagine you have in the past as well, managed an exceptionally large team. Now, Amy and I, we've both kind of had people management experience, but it's been with quite relatively smaller teams. So how, I guess, how do you adjust your style to kind of what your team needs at any given time? And also, what advice would you give to people that might be in a similar position?
Well, I think firstly, it's a great question. When you work in sales, you have to be a chameleon and you have to get used to change. However, I think the balancing, the tipping point is, as a leader, doesn't matter who you're speaking to, you have to have core values and you have to ensure that these are both congruent and visible. Non-negotiable, absolute necessity for me, because people value authenticity above all else. And also they want to see if they trust you and whether your values are aligned. Now, the nice thing for me is that I've had the fortune to work in different companies and also different roles. So it comes easy. So when you start your career in service delivery and in operations, you actually see firsthand what can happen when sales are not aligned, when you're not engaged, and they can actually sell something that benefits them, but ultimately doesn't benefit the customer and doesn't benefit you in service delivery and operations, and the challenges it causes. And what that does is it gives you a different lens and perspective.
Yes.
And then again, I had a very brief stint in finance. I realised what I'm not good at, and that's why I naturally build strong relationships with my friends and colleagues in finance. But actually, again, a sale's not a sale until it's paid for, and you understand the process. So for me, it feels very, very natural to take on board different people's viewpoints. But the advice I would give is, remember that everyone has that positive intention behind the action. Therefore, don't judge them on the action. Ask them how they arrived at it. So if you're a student, there's a reason why the teacher asks you to see your workings out. Yes. Because the end answer might not be the one you're looking for. How you arrived in it is different. And for me, as advice to leaders, is star piece is relatively simple. What people want to know is, what's in it for me and how can I contribute to the success of the organization? So you have to personalize what they're doing and how they impact. You need them to feel valued and you need them to know that you care about them. And I can't overstate this enough. This isn't a technique. It should be your core value. You should really genuinely every day think, I've got a big responsibility here to enrich the lives of people, to help flatten the speed bumps on the road of life for them. And it doesn't matter if you're fixing your products, if you're marketing, you're selling, or you're billing them, it's exactly the same conversation.
I love that. What a good analogy.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I love that you've kind of said that as well, Mark, because I do think that kind of we've been through a lot of transition, both in our personal lives and work lives in the last couple of years and for some time now. And I think I loved what you said there, in the sense that actually it's about understanding all the different kind of areas within the business, or different people's kind of perspectives, looking at things through a different lens. And I think that's absolutely key. And actually that's something that I would really love to see us doing more in the business, is actually talking to each other in different areas of business, really understanding what our different roles are, how, you know, because really it should be one whole seamless approach, shouldn't it, really, when you think about kind of our customer engagement and things like that. And I do, Amy and I talk about this a lot, but it seems to fit quite well, Ames, in terms of adaptability. If we could, I don't know, maybe look at some kind of way of getting more shadowing happening, or just more of kind of like networking around the business, I think, so that we could, because I do think it helps, Mark, as you say, if you have more of an understanding of different, and this goes in personal lives as well, doesn't it? If we have more of a different understanding of different people's values, then I suppose we can be more rounded people ourselves. But I do think that's something that we could absolutely look to do more of in the business. Do you agree, Amy?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's comes right back to one of the first things that we were talking around, what makes a person adaptable as well. So when you're broadening out that mindset and understanding different perspectives, or, you know, in this case, what we're discussing is like different functions or different roles, then actually it helps you be more adaptable because you're thinking on a wider scale. So I think for anyone listening to the podcast that's, you know, actively trying to enhance their adaptability, agility, or resilience-esque skills, I think broadening out that, you know, obviously the growth mindset that we spoke about, but actually, you know, I think you said it earlier, Sam, be curious, like get to understand a little bit more outside of that, you know, that box of where your role kind of sits, and think broader, because actually it's only going to help you.
It's why children grow, Amy. It's why you see the as a child, yes, your brain's more malleable, more soft, and it is designed to grow. But typically, it's because you're exposed to more things. The conversation I regularly have with both my children, and the teams is be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes,
it's my favorite phrase.
If you're if you're uncomfortable, then quite often it's because the situation is not a situation, back to your point around situation you can control. But the more you expose yourself to that type of situation, the more you understand it's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay not to know how to fix it. And then what that typically does is it makes you ask questions, and questions are one of the most powerful things we have in our arsenal.
Yeah, that is a very good point, because that's how you're curious. If you ask questions, you find out more information. It's
I was going to say, not to be mistaken with nosiness, because I think it's one of those same classic things, though, isn't it? It's like when young girls get known as bossy in school, and actually it's like, no, it's assertiveness. And I do think people are put off, well, don't be nosy, when people are actually, you know, when you're younger, you are told that, aren't you? But actually, it's curiosity. We need to encourage it more.
I ask a lot of questions.
Going to start a campaign.
Just on that, I think we've spoken quite a lot so far about, you know, some of the positives of what we can do to keep being resilient and to try and get more comfortable with being adaptable. But Mark, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, what do you find? So we've got all of these tools in our back pocket. We know exactly what we're meant to be doing. But what do you find the hardest when, you know, you're in that moment and you know you need to be resilient, but sometimes it's hard to get there? What do you find the hardest in that moment of trying to kind of shift your mindset?
I don't always think you need to be resilient, because I think real life happens to us, and it happens at such a pace. I don't think there's a big magical banner that appears in front of your eyes going, you now need to be resilient. Flick the switch.
That would be much easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be. And I think it's a learnt behavior. Back to the analogy I made around machetes in the jungle versus motorways. If you think why soldiers train, it's because when it gets noisy, which is the military parlance for poo hitting the fan, what actually happens is they default to their training. And I think for me, resilience is a learnt behavior, and it stems from your mindset. It's either cup half full or cup half empty. And I was brought up by someone whose default position was negative and pessimistic. Therefore, for me, that was my view of the world. And I thought that was reality, and that was pragmatism. And that was my view of being resilient, i.e., I expect the worst, and guess what? It happened. Therefore, I'm resilient because I knew it was going to happen. I think what I've done and what others can do is, if you invest in yourself and your mindset, and you invest in developing that mindset, then you learn that there is another way. And ultimately, when something happens, you don't immediately run around like chicken licking saying the sky's fallen in. You just have a wry smile and go, aha, another challenge, and I need to overcome it. And I'm not downplaying the challenges that we face, because some of them are incredibly challenging to deal with. However, the challenge is the same. It's your response to it that's the difference.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? It's so true. And do you find, Mark, but it's interesting what you were saying, that actually you definitely didn't have this type of mindset when you were growing up then, did you?
100%.
So
I'd say probably not until the age of 26 did I even get anywhere close to starting the journey. So I was quite late in life. And I think if you want to accelerate it, expose yourself to people that exemplify it. And the more time you spend with them, the quicker you'll learn.
That's a great tip. Is that kind of, what was your tip, if you don't mind me asking, what was your tipping point that made you realise, actually, I need to?
I was going to ask the exact same thing.
Am I being nosy or curious?
No, it's an interesting. I think that the tipping point for me is when I started to move from being an individual contributor to being a manager of people. And I realized that these people are reliant on me, and I can demonstrate a good work ethic. I can demonstrate caring. I can demonstrate honesty, trust. There's lots of things that I could point to that were good, but actually, what did they typically need me for? And they needed me when things got tough, were uncertain. Again, when things were VUCA, that's when they need you the most. And ultimately, if you're going to bloodlet and navel gaze and empathise with them, that's not helpful. And I think it's then that the journey really in investing in myself and in terms of self-development, as opposed to just attending prescribed courses that the company had offered, which were great. But I think once you start on that journey of self-development and you realise now that the podcasts that are available are mind-blowing.
Yes.
And a concept that was introduced to me, I think it was Tony Robbins, talked about net time. So net time is no extra time or no additional time. And what that means is you can be making the dinner, doing the ironing, doing the washing. You can be doing any mundane task with a set of earbuds or headphones on, and you can be developing yourself, and it's no additional time than you were going to spend in the day. And the output is phenomenal.
Yeah. This is very, you're giving me goosebumps a little bit, Mark, because this is good for me. I'm going to take a lot away from this. But I just think Amy and I, we talk so much, don't we, about self-development all the time. You know, we're constantly plugging it, but it's amazing to actually speak to somebody that can kind of come back and actually really have quite a lot to show for it, if that makes sense. How do you what's the word? How do you kind of motivate yourself to constantly do that, Mark, as well?
How do I motivate myself? I think it's it really is the biggest privilege you can ever have, being a manager of people. And I didn't use the word leader deliberately, because leader is not a conferred title, it's an earned title, and anybody can be a leader, and it's up to you to decide who your leaders are.
Yes.
So for me, I literally wake up and my first thought is about servant leadership. How can I deliver on those people, not just those that are in a direct reporting line, but how can I make the lives better of people? And if you look at our values as a business, really quite simple. Can we save money or make money? And can we enhance the customer experience and the employee experience? There's really 4 very simple points to our moral compass.
Yeah.
And for me, that gets me out of bed in the morning, because it's very easy to navigate yourself to one of those 4 points to see where you can make a difference. And arguably, if you're not delivering on one of those 4, then are you doing the right thing?
Okay.
Yeah. And I think as well, and just coming back to what you said as well, Sam, about, you know, kind of the self-development piece, because my question, Mark, was going to be about how do you kind of manage to work and build up your resilience. But I think we've covered a lot of that already. And I think that's constantly, you know, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. There's, you know, a wealth of resources there. But what I definitely would say to everyone as well is it's always good to find someone or a group of people that are like-minded, because it's all well and good listening to everything, but actually it's really good to have that kind of that group of people that you can soundboard off of as well, to talk about the things that you've heard and how can you put it into practice. And would you agree, Mark, that that's something that's been quite beneficial for you as well, like kind of developing your resilience?
100%. There's so many people in life that you can learn from. I think we touched on it at the start of the conversation, and the key for me is to surround yourself by the people that you want to be. And again, if you look at a leadership book and it says, I think my favorite one, because it's pertinent to me at the moment, is if you want to learn to swim, don't read a book about learning to swim. You can read a book that tells you some things, but ultimately you need to get wet,
get out and do it,
get in a pool and do it, and then you realize that you can't learn everything from a book. And that's where, if there's someone that's a swimming coach and their job is to train you to swim, you can make more progress in a few hours than you can do in a few years doing it yourself. So look for the people that role model the behaviors that you want to be, spend time with them, suck up their knowledge, question them, not to death, Amy, but question them and get a head start, leapfrog ahead of where you would typically be.
Amazing. Yeah, people could maybe not ask as many questions as I do, but
it's good
to be curious.
Exactly.
I'm definitely curious, that's for sure.
So nosy.
Oh, this has been, I mean, I think, Sam, I'll speak on behalf of both of us. I think we could probably talk about this all day.
Yes.
It's just been, honestly, Mark, it's been fantastic having you on our podcast. I think, people listening, there's like a wealth of knowledge there that they can kind of pull from and learn more. And I think actually, if the two of you would be happy, I think it's probably something that we could do a part 2 on, just following up on a lot of the things that we've discussed today, because there is so much out there that I think we could talk about. But what I would like to end on is I think slowly becoming our famous question now at the end of all our podcasts. What is the best career advice that you've ever received to date?
Oh, wow. That's
why?
And why? Yeah, we're making it harder now.
I think aside from the advice that I had from my granddad around what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because that's not particular to career, I think the one thing I would say is, if it's to be, it's up to me. I think hold yourself accountable.
Yes.
Don't see failure as a bad thing, because you're inclined then to shy away from it. You're inclined not to make mistakes because you're inclined not to do things that might not work out, because you'll see it as a mistake and you'll see failure as a bad thing. If you see failure as a teacher, it loses its power over you. And actually, if we look at the innovators in society, and even if it's the big companies, what we buy from them, it didn't magically appear. They didn't have an idea and then they popped it out on the shelf. That happened because they saw failure as a learning process. So for me, if it's to be, it's up to me, and learn actively. Don't try to fail. Please don't misunderstand. But actually, don't see failure as being the worst thing that can happen. See it as a teacher.
What a piece of advice.
Absolutely love it.
That's brilliant.
If it's to be, it's up to me. I love that, Mark. I'm going to put it on a post-it note.
Yeah,
I really love it. And also, the whole notion of failure. We talked a lot to Rob about failure as well. And Ames, it might be quite a nice idea to have Rob and Mark on together to talk about failure a little bit more. But I think that's absolutely key what you've just said. It's about taking risks, isn't it, Mark? And I think that plays into adaptability big time. So.
Yeah.
Well, good, and thanks very much for the invite again. It's
thank you.
Very kind of you to have me on board, and let's wait for the feedback from your audience before we say whether there's a part 2.
True.
I'm going with confidence. I think that people will enjoy it. No, honestly, thank you everyone so much for listening. As always, we really appreciate it, and I think we'd love to actually hear from you as well. So if you've managed to kind of take anything from this podcast and put it into any practice, or have any comments or anything that we haven't touched on, we would love to hear from you. So please do reach out to us. But yeah, I think that's us for today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so
Very much.
much. Thanks, Mark. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.